Welcome back to Season 2 of One More Story. It is great to be back. Apologies for the hiatus, but we've got some great guests lined up for this next round of stories. And in this first episode, I sit down with an old friend and uber-talented musician, Charles Hedgepath. Be sure to check out his music on all the usual platforms, as well as the Curfew Foundation, which is a charity he founded with Marcus King to support musicians facing mental health and addiction challenges. There's a link in the show notes if you would like to learn more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's episode. My guest tonight is Charles Hedgepath. He is a singer, songwriter, and a multi-instrumentalist based in the upstate of South Carolina. Hedgepath has spent the last 2 decades playing and recording in the southeastern United States and beyond. Charles, welcome to the show.
Peter, thanks for having me. Really appreciate being here.
And I got to add, I've known you longer than any other guest I've ever had on. We've been friends since the 5th grade.
So I was thinking about we'd have to normally, in the beginning, we'd have to ask our parents' permission to be able to hang out. And now we don't have to do that. Yeah. So that's kind of cool. We don't have to call a third party and say like, hey, can we get together and hang out and do a podcast? No, we can do it directly.
That would be weird as a adult in your mid-40s to ask your parents for permission.
Did you tell your parents that we were going to be doing this?
I did not. I forgot to mention that the last time we spoke. They've been checking in on me to see how things are going with my movie and my life. And
you've been busy.
Yes. I have.
So congratulations.
Thank you. And I don't think this episode will come out until I'm done with my director's cut. So apologies to my One More Story listeners for having such a lag in content, but I've been busy.
It'll be worth the wait.
I hope so. I mean, I'm excited to have you on, and I love talking to musicians. I love talking about music.
Well, I appreciate you using my music in your intro.
Oh, right. I probably should have mentioned that.
It's always... Well, that's okay that you didn't, because now I have. But you did approach me on that, and that's a great thing about music and just recordings, because that was something done a long time ago, and now it's got new life, and it's I think it's a good fit to the podcast.
Oh, it's perfect. Yeah. So just to clarify for all you listeners, we use Charles's track "Arthur's Seat" as the intro to the podcast, and when I say we, I mean me, because I'm the only one who does this, and that's why we haven't had any episodes, because I've been busy. But yes, it's the perfect music for the intro to the podcast, and I've used some of your other tracks along the way as well.
Yeah, so that's a fun thing about writing and composing, and particularly being able to now that there's a world of podcasts and there's so many other content opportunities. I think there's a lot more opportunities for independent artists to have those opportunities, sync licensing or, being part of a podcast. So it's a great thing for musicians to have.
It is. And you've played with a lot of musicians over the years. Tell me a little bit about, you make your living as a musician, which is extraordinary on its own.
I think thank you for that. I do think it's hard to do it as an actor or writer too. I find it be challenging to read a monologue at a restaurant and people want to listen to that. It's kind of easier to play guitar and sing. But, being from Greenville and this southeast area, and closer to Atlanta, there's in the jam band scene, I got very lucky and played and toured with a band, and then met a lot of people through that and was able to maintain relationships. Some of those folks sadly have moved on, but, played with folks from widespread panic. So I'm not sure if everyone out there knows about Colonel Bruce Hampton and the Aquarium Rescue Unit, but some of those guys, and then Jan Rico Scott and the Derek Trucks Band, and Kofi Burbage. Jan Rico and Ike Stubblefield did my Christmas album and gospel album, and so I got blessed being close to a large city that had a lot of things going on, and particularly the Derek Trucks situation, because Eric Clapton had just hired him to go on tour with him, and that left his band to be able to play and do things, and so that opened up a lot of opportunities recording wise and playing wise for me. And then more recently out of Greenville, South Carolina, I cannot fail to mention Marcus King.
Love Marcus King.
And he's doing great, and I'm not sure when this will air, but he was on the Tonight Show, and I've caught a lot of performances on that. I'm a big Seth Meyers fan, and so I usually catch the musical act, and I'm not being partial, but that was one of the better ones that I have seen in a long time. And there's actually like some good studio audience response to that. So it's been fun to see what he's done, and it's been fun to work and continue to write with him. So I'm excited about some of the songs that we'll have coming out here. I'm not sure when his next release will be, but I'm excited to have a couple songs on that.
Nice. Are there artists who haven't you worked with that you would love to work with? I mean,
there's so many. It would, just the moonshots would be before they go. Some, like your Willie Nelsons or your Bob Dylans or something like that. But that's, I would have loved to have been able to play with John Prine, or been able to hang out with him. He's a great singer-songwriter. There's a newer, I don't know if you're familiar with Thundercat. He's he's kind of a alter persona of a great bass player, but he did some work with Ariana Grande, and she's covered a couple of his songs. But for me, he's like the kind of pushing music in a newer direction, and the same thing. And he works with a drummer, J.D. Beck, and a piano player named Domi. And I think they're the ones that are finding new ground and has some popular sensibility and that's very hard to do, because the Beatles covered a lot of ground. And as far as rock and roll and things that you can do. So it's harder to conquer and create new lanes of music, particularly in rock dominated kind of instruments. So those are the ones that I think that I would like to work with, that I think are kind of pushing things.
Gotcha. Now, growing up, you started playing guitar at a very early age. I remember you were playing Hootie and the Blowfish songs on your acoustic guitar. Columbia, South Carolina's very own.
And those guys. So I did something with Mark Bryan recently.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So Mark Bryan was definitely, and I've told him this. It's like he was my first guitar hero, and it's interesting. And recently doing something with him, listening to those songs again, and be like, oh yeah, God, that's a really well written song. They just had that for a long time, and they were just cranking them out, and they were just hitting on that level where there was fatigue, famously so. But it's been interesting to get to know Mark and be able to full circle be the kid that was playing, Let Her Cry around a campfire, and then, being able to work with them. Here's a funny story about things happening in the business. I was supposed to they were opening up a new venue in Columbia, and it was supposed to be Hootie and the Blowfish and Craven Mellon, and I think Edwin was on it, and I was going to play too. And the night before, it got canceled because they had some issues with the plumbing. And so it was going to be a great, like, being able to play back home with those guys. And it's like the call the day before. And things always happen, but you never expect, like, there was an issue with plumbing. I mean, it was like it was on the venue. So I don't know. I think it was something like it was built on some weird kind of like grade or something like that. And somebody didn't check that. And anytime you open up a business, particularly a music venue, the permits get looked at pretty heavily.
Right.
And so someone did not dot an I or cross a T.
I mean, was it like a bathroom incident and somebody was like John Popper there like the night before or something, or like?
No, I mean, this was like the day before. So like nobody loaded in or nobody set up, because so it was like it was canceled within 24 hours before the thing.
That's a bummer. That's a bummer.
But that would have been fun, because I remember seeing them at the Township Auditorium, and that Danielle Howe was there, opening it up for him, and that's just another great. She should be on this podcast too. I'll get her to do that. She's a great storyteller.
Yeah, I have not heard that name in decades, but it's
she's still doing. I mean, she's an amazing songwriter.
Yeah,
one of the better ones out there. I put her and Kevin Kinney in the same category.
And you've played with Kevin Kinney, haven't you?
Well, we did like more. I had a music video, and I had Drivin and Cryin come and play. I think that we did like maybe Straight to Hell. He's very nice about getting everybody up there and playing that. It was a great song.
Yeah,
but definitely, that was one of the few times that I was kind of like really excited or more starstruck, was having Drivin and Cryin playing at my place. Now that the video only lasted 6 months, but we had a great Drivin and Cryin experience.
Yeah, they're one of my favorites. I mean, I went back recently, occasionally I'll get into a nostalgic deep dive, and I started to go back to some of their earliest albums from the late 80s, and they were doing music then that nobody else was doing. I don't even know how to describe it. You could probably describe it better than I could. I
think those that like grunge could see some precursors in just like a separate evolution, because this is before the internet, and so you got that Seattle scene, but what was going on around here, but it still had very similar energy. But sadly, I think when Seattle kind of clicked, it left Drivin and Cryin somewhere on the more of the wayside. And then maybe that was the rise of Hootie after that. But for me, Drivin and Cryin, it's an amazing band and really strong, well-written rock songs, outside of the straight to hell.
Yeah, I mean, Honeysuckle Blues is probably one of my favorite, as
Great
far
song.
as a crowd pleaser. I think I prefer that over Straight to Hell. But yeah, it was like this southern indie grunge rock that really nobody else. It was a sound that, and in his voice is such a unique voice, and it still holds up. I mean, those are some incredible albums.
There's a band I play in, we still play Catch the Wind, which is another and Cryin one, another just well written Kevin Kinney song. Another buddy of mine does a lot of his solo stuff.
Okay.
And I just imagine Kevin Kinney wakes up and there's a song next to him because he wrote one in the middle of the night and he didn't realize. I mean, he's that prolific. It's like he's like that. Steve Earle's like that.
So, since this is a storytelling podcast, what is it for you and music and story that drives you, that keeps you going and inspires you every day to create music?
Having always been playing music, it's just felt like a natural thing. And so it's just an interesting thing to do what you feel naturally as a career.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so that was some learning curves doing that. And so it's like, well, what do I want to do? And how do I want to, you know, go about telling things? And so I went, you know, I started writing songs and then, you know, songs with words. And then I went through a very strange phase of just writing instrumental music. And I wanted to figure out if I could tell a story, you know, without words and write melodies and maybe create moods well enough that it said something and people can connect to. Because I think that's the challenge with some instrumental music is like, you know, it can be unrelatable. You know, it can maybe be over people's heads, but it's like, you know, having some melodies and some, if you are going to do something that's instrumental, you want people to relate to it. It's like, you know, when Darth Vader shows up, you know exactly what the music's going to be.
Right.
Yeah, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum. Very, you know, direct. And he took, you know, a mood and a simple idea. Same thing with Halloween. I mean, John Carpenter, think about it, he wasn't really a musician, but he was able to tell a really freaky thing with just that relationship that he did with those few notes, and then just changing the keys and modulating it, you know. So that's the kind of, that's what I like to do. And now I've gotten back to writing more with lyrics again, and that's where I've always been. But now I've been able to take both of those worlds, and I think it helps me tell a better story. I think there's a lot of songwriting out there that is simple for the fact that maybe they don't have many tools to use from. And so it's simple by the fact that they're limited in some chord ways, or, you know, something musically or something vocally. And so I feel like the journey going through learning multiple genres and going through writing instrumentals and then writing, you know, all different forms of songs, like, you know, jazz tunes, bluegrass, all those different things that I feel have now made me a better writer. And so I'm definitely driven to continue that process, because it seems like now ideas become easier because the work that was put in ahead of time, and having gone through the process of creating now more than, you know, once.
Gotcha. You mentioned, well, but you mentioned this as a career, which it is for you. Was there ever a time, you know, we are both, you know, independent artists, storytellers in our own fields, and you know, I've definitely had moments where I'm like, why am I doing this? It was actually all last year when my movie got shut down for the first time, and then it miraculously came back. But was there ever a time where you're like, I should just get a regular job?
You know, there's always things that you could think of about doing, but I never really thought ever like, man, I'm going to go the Kinko's. I think I was able, and because I think there is some more flexibility within music for stringing gigs together. You know,
right.
I prepared myself to do, you know, and when the band stopped playing, you know, I had to do more solo stuff, or, you know, I taught lessons, or I ran sound, or I did, you know, studio work. So it was more about like trying to add those other things, because I think I realized that, you know, if I went in a different direction and didn't do something like musically or in the entertainment world, I would be miserable.
Right.
You know, or like, you know, I don't even know what it is that I would do. Like, would I be a Walmart greeter, you know, or some other kind of thing?
Right.
You know, I think that's about what I could do. Like, hello, welcome to Walmart. Is Walmart one of your sponsors?
I don't have any sponsors yet. I'm not quite there.
I'm pretty sure that Walmart's going to want to pick this up now.
mean,
but
maybe.
I think because and you remember, like I started playing, and like if you was being compensated like 15 and 16
Yeah.
for playing, so it was hard. Like, what? You can get, I was like, I'm having fun, and you can get, paid for this. And so, and I think maybe if I hadn't have started younger, maybe I would have thought about some, different career
Right.
paths, and maybe something reflective, some kind of crazy paralegal on the side, or whatever, and then rocking at night. But I think I've been thankfully enough living in this area and having a diversity of jobs and a diversity of people to work with. I've been able to string things together to keep it on.
Yeah. It's funny you said, you were getting paid for gigs in high school, and I think about, us doing theater together in high school, and I mean nobody was paying, like you just there's no path.
I here's the thing, it's like I wanted to be in Little Shop of Horrors, and I didn't get into, I wasn't casted, but I played in the orchestra, and I got paid to do that.
You got paid for that?
I got paid for that.
I
paid well.
I was inside the plant. Do you remember that? I was the operator.
Yes, I do remember you're inside. And who was the actress? As Evan Rachel Wood, she's doing it now on Broadway. I just saw her advertise that. I was pretty excited about that. But that brought up those memories of like wanting to be in the show, but playing in the pit, and like I got paid well, but sadly that money went. My amp had gotten stolen, so all the money I made from Little Shop of Horrors went to replacing. No, it wasn't. It was a guitar. My guitar got stolen, and so all the money that I'd made at that point, went to rebuying a guitar.
Before I forget, so Charles, where can our listeners find your music, and what are you working on right now?
You can find my music on all platforms, Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Tidal. I'm currently working on a couple of production projects, one in the vein of a travel show, and one that's going to be scripted, that I will hopefully be a guest on this podcast again and talk about it later.
Well, I know you do, you do some jazz, you do some improvisational stuff with your work with jam bands and stuff. How do you feel about improvising a couple bedtime stories?
I think it's going to be interesting.
All right. The word is suit. Once upon a time, there was an old man named Bartholomew. And Bartholomew was a curious fellow, and he lived all by himself in an old house on an old street. And he would occasionally go for walks in the neighborhood. When he would go on these walks, it was very strange because, yes, he lived on an old street, but the rest of the streets around him, the houses were a bit newer, younger families, and he would often venture into those areas. And he would always wear a 3-piece suit. And now kids who are listening and dress way more casually than I did when I was a child. I was forced to wear saddle shoes as a child, and you can look those up and just be thankful your parents don't force you to wear those. Kids, adults, everyone dresses more casually these days. But not Bartholomew. He would wear a 3-piece suit, and a 3-piece suit is exactly as it sounds. It's pants, a jacket, and a vest is that third piece of the suit. And he had 7 different 3-piece suits, one for each day of the week. And every day, he would go walking through the various neighborhoods. He would leave his old street where there were other older men and older women in their more traditional, fancier clothes, their 3-piece suits and their long dresses. It was as if every day was a church Sunday on his street, but he ventured into these casual, hip, younger areas, and the moms are all out wearing their Lululemons, and the kids are wearing pajama pants, most likely, because that's all they wear these days. And immediately they would notice Bartholomew in his strange 3-piece suit. Well, one day he came upon a young family walking. It was a husband who was wearing
a tie-dye t-shirt. And Bartholomew thought, what in the world is this? In his whole days, he had never seen any garment of clothing with that many colors. Red, green, yellow, blue, purple, all swirled around together into amazing patterns. And Bartholomew reached out and said, "Sir, where did you get that amazing garment?" And the man replied, "Well, my family helped me make it." And Bartholomew sat there stunned. See, every single 3-piece suit that he'd gotten had come from a particular store. And he never knew that someone themselves could create such a thing. And then he said to the man, "Well, how can you help me get a tie-dye so I can make my suits that I wear every day to look so good like yours?" And then the man looked at his family and said, "What do you think about showing him how we make tie-dyes?" The family looked at him and said, "Oh yeah, he seems like he'd be a good candidate." Because people that wear tie-dye t-shirts may, sometimes they have a different outlook on life. They're not as stuffy as some of the 3-piece suit wearing people from Bartholomew's neighborhood. So they said, "Bartholomew, why don't you come back tomorrow at 3 o'clock and meet us at this address, and we'll plan a picnic, and then we'll bring everything that's needed to make you a tie-dyed 3-piece suit." And Bartholomew was extremely excited. One, he doesn't really get to hang out with people. That's a new thing for him. So he went back home, and after dinner, he couldn't sleep. He was just excited. He didn't know what was going to happen and how they were actually going to be able to get together and be able to make his tie-dyed suit. So finally, after tossing and turning and drinking lots of tea and listening to an amazing podcast, he was able to go to sleep. And so he woke up the very next day, and he was just really still excited. He skipped breakfast completely. He normally is the type of person, most people in 3-piece suits, they have a pretty regimented type of day. And so normally he starts off with an orange and some cereal, but he completely skipped that and completely forgot about breakfast. He was just so focused on getting this tie-dye 3-piece suit thing happening. And so finally, about 1 o'clock, before he was supposed to meet them at 3, he realized that he hadn't eaten anything. And so finally he went, made himself a fried egg on a piece of toast, and sat there and stood and stared at the clock. And the clock said 2:15, and it was just too much for him to bear. So he got his things together and slowly started walking to the address, knowing that he was going to beat the family there. So as he's walking, he's taking his time. It's a beautiful day. He sees all the other people in their three-piece suits and their fancy dresses. And today's kind of the first day where he thinks that he's got one up on him, like he's got a little secret. And so he's walking with a little pep in his step. And so finally, he gets to the address, and it's just a little early, and he sees the family setting up this beautiful picnic spread. It's got everything. It's got sandwiches, it's got juice, it's got snacks, it's got chocolates, it's got that cheese board, all these things that Bartholomew loves. And so as soon as he gets there, the family waves him over, and they say, "Please, come sit down." Bartholomew gladly sits down on the blanket, and he's handed a plate of food. And so once he's finished with his sandwich, he tells the family, he's like, "Guys, I'm just too excited about this tie-dye thing. Can you please just help me out here?" "Well, did you bring your other 6 three-piece suits?" He said, "Yes, I got them right here." And so the family takes them one by one and starts wrapping them around in little patterns and starts fixing them with rubber bands, and it looks all strange, and he has no idea what's going on. And they take them and they finally throw them into a big vat. And in this vat, there's all types of dye, all crazy colors. And he has to sit, and so he doesn't know what's going on. He's never gone through this process, so he thinks that they just threw his things away. And they said, "Bartholomew, we're going to take an hour, we're going to hang these up, and they'll be the most beautiful suits that you've ever seen." And so he said, "Okay, I can wait a little bit longer, and I'll watch for these to dry." And so while they were waiting for them to dry, they started a friendly game of pickleball. And Bartholomew had never heard of such a thing, and so he enjoyed it, but was still looking over at his tie-dyes. And finally, after the game was over, they slowly went over to where the three-piece suits were hanging, and they opened them up, and it was the most beautiful three-piece tie-dye suit that anyone had ever seen or anyone had ever made.
And Bartholomew changed into one of the beautiful tie-dye three-piece suits, and he walked back into his neighborhood with all the old, stuffy people in their old-fashioned suits and their old dresses. And they stopped, and they stared at him, and then they smiled one by one. At first, they weren't sure what they were looking at. It was new, it was different, it challenged their norms and their worldviews. And then suddenly Bartholomew said, "Would anyone like to play pickleball?" And that was the day that Bartholomew introduced tie-dye fashion and pickleball to all the old folks in the neighborhood.
The end.
Charles Hedgepath, are you ready for one more story?
Possibly.
Good enough.
Affirmative.
The word is ocean.
We know that there are 7 oceans, and there have been 7 oceans for a long time. And these oceans tell many, many, many different stories, as all the oceans are connected together. So the different oceans kind of like to tell their different stories to each other, just to kind of keep up in what's going on in the world. and to kind of know common threads and different, themes and what people are up to. And so this story comes from the Atlantic Ocean. So there's a small little town, and there's a little boy, and he loves going out on the ocean, loves spending all his days out there, loves going fishing, crabbing, all the things that you can name it, all the things that kids like to do when they get to live by the ocean. But he, like all little boys and girls, has a bedtime and has to listen to his parents and when to go to sleep, just like everyone else. And just like every little kid, there's always been, since the dawn of time, monsters under the bed. And so this particular story from this particular ocean has to do more with how they got there. Because we've heard of this for a long time. I had monsters under my bed. My dad had monsters under his bed. His dad had monsters under, and so on, as far back as that we could remember. But this was a different story, because up until this time, those monsters and the little kids, they haven't really interacted much. And so this is how it came to be that this little boy learned that there was a monster, but he wasn't really a monster. He was just assigned there. And he didn't even know why he was there. He's just been doing this job, for a long time. And part of that job was to keep track of, how long that, little boy was sleeping. But also he was responsible for all the missed socks. So any sock that was gone, that was the monster. That was his job, to take that sock and bring it to his little monster home. So when you wake up and you can't find that sock in the dryer, this is where it would go. Or if you're missing that utensil or some part of your house that you swore that you put it in a drawer, that's their job. They don't know why they're doing it, but they're supposed to be collecting this stuff for whatever reason. So this monster finally wises up that he really doesn't like, this whole situation. He doesn't know why he's there. He doesn't know why he's assigned to this little boy and has to stay under this bed. So he starts to kind of make some noise that kind of, it sticks out, because normally they're supposed to be, under the radar and not able to be seen or heard. But, he's tired of the situation. He's tired of having to go steal socks. He's tired of having to go through the utensil drawers and taking that small fork, or, those little things that for corn on the cob that holds the corn when it's really hot and you're missing one. Well, he takes those too, but he doesn't know why. And so he's sitting there, and it's about midnight. And so he starts humming a song, and the little boy hears it and he recognizes it, but he doesn't know where it's coming from. And so he kind of raises up from his bed. He keeps hearing this song. And then finally it gets a little bit louder, and he peeks his head under the bed, and there is the monster. Now, the little boy wasn't scared, because he realized it wasn't really just a monster. It was just this poor little thing that was kind of stuck under his bed. And so the little boy said to the monster, well, first, what are you singing? I know that song. And he goes, well, all monsters are forced to sing public domain songs. He's like, what? He's like, I can't explain public domain to you, but the song is London Bridge is Falling. I said, London Bridge is falling down. And the little boy, that's why he knew the song, because he had heard the song before. And the little boy, he's like, you're actually made to sing and know that song? He's like, yes. That's one of the things that I have to do every single day. And it's like, well, what else do you have to do? He's like, well, when your parents do laundry. He's like, yeah, of course. He's like, well, it's my job to go and make sure that something's missing. I was like, well, why do you do that? He's like, I have no idea. This is just what I've been told to do my whole entire life. I've collected socks, I've collected forks, I've collected rakes, anything, that you can think of that can go missing in a house. And he's like, that was you? He's like, I got blamed for most of those. He's like, I'm very, very sorry for that. You should not have been blamed for that. So who you can blame is the League of Monsters. He's like, the League of Monsters? He's like, yeah, those are the ones that put us all here. And it's like, they put you here, so there's more than one of you. He's like, I'm not the only one that has a monster under my bed. He's like, no. He's like, go to school tomorrow and go tell your best friend that at midnight, if he sings London Bridge is Falling Down, that his monster will be forced to come out and reveal himself. He's like, okay. I don't know if anybody's going to believe me. I was like, well, why wouldn't they believe you? You've always been a good friend. You've always been trustworthy. And so, finally, after talking for a while, he said, I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to wake up and I'll go to school and I'll think about it. And I'll think about telling him on the bus. And so he wakes up the next day and he doesn't know. He's just still kind of floored from last night. He's never met a monster, much less one that he feels bad for. And so he goes and gets on the school bus after staying at a school stop, and he sees his best friend. And he goes, listen, last night it was kind of strange. I have to tell you something, and you have to believe me. Just don't say anything until I'm done telling you. So he's like, well, what is it? It's like, okay, there are monsters underneath our beds. And he's like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, there are totally monsters underneath our bed. They're part of this strange league of monsters, and they're the ones that are forced to collect, all the things from our laundry and all around the house that go missing. And he's like, that can't be. He's like, trust me. So when you go to bed tonight at midnight, start singing London Bridge is Falling Down, and I promise that your monster that's assigned to you will reveal himself. Like, oh, okay. And so his best friend goes home next night, doesn't make it to midnight, falls asleep at 11:55, so goes to school the next day, completely apologizes and said, I'm so sorry. I was so tired I fell asleep. He's like, all right, we'll try it again tonight. And so the next night, he was able to stay awake, and it was midnight. He started singing, London Bridge is falling down, and right immediately, he hears this other voice, London Bridge is falling down, and this monster pops up. He's like, well, how did you know how to do that? And he said, well, my best friend said that his monster told him to do this, and that you would pop out and you would reveal yourself to me. He's like, I have been stuck here collecting socks and forks and all these other things for years, and I never thought that anyone would be able to talk to me. And best friend was completely blown away. And so he met his monster. They hit it off. They hung out all night long. Next day at school on the bus, they know what's going on. And so the two boys now are going to try to set their monsters free, but they don't really know how to do that. They don't know who set them up there. And so they devised a plan that night with their monsters to go and be able to see their world where they keep all of the missing things from everyone's house. So that night at midnight, they sang at each of their houses. They sang London Bridge is Falling Down, and their monsters woke up, and they each opened up a little door underneath their bed and said, please follow me and I'll show you exactly what's going on. And so they went through the little door, and after traveling for probably about 15 minutes, they had to crawl and do, it's kind of a small area to go through. it opens up into the biggest room that either of them had ever seen. And there's piles of everything. There's socks. There's socks from Christmas. There's socks that are knee socks. There's socks that are ankle socks. There's every single type of sock you could ever think of. And you see these monsters trying to put them in different, colors and codes and stuff like that. And you see these other ones going through these little forks and knives and trying to make place settings and all this stuff. And so it was just a lot of chaotic activity, but the boys were pretty awestruck. They had never seen anything like it, and their monsters were like, yes, this is what we have to do. Can you please help us? And they're, well, is there anyone in charge? And the monster kind of sat there. They both looked at each other, and they're like, well, we're not really sure. I think we're part of a union, but we don't really know what that is. And the boys were like, union? I don't really, that's okay. Well, we'll have to look into that and see what we can come up. Maybe we can ask a teacher. No, don't ask a teacher. We can't let any adults know what's going on with this. So the boys were like, okay, we have to come up with a plan. We're going to go back and we're going to go to sleep and we're going to rest on this. And then tomorrow night, we're going to set you free. So the boys, they go to sleep, they go to school. They couldn't really do any of their work. They were too excited about everything and really nervous about what they were going to do because they had grown very fond of their monsters and knew that they didn't want to be doing what they were doing. And so at midnight, they sang the song, London Bridge is Falling Down. And then they followed their monsters back to the big room. And they noticed there was a little door. And they said, well, has anyone knocked on this door or been to this door? And I was like, no, we're not allowed to. And the boys are like, well, that's obviously something wrong. So we're going to figure out what's going on. And they go and they knock on the door. And then slowly the door opens and it's a very old monster. He's probably the first one. And they asked him, it's like, what is your name? He's like, I am number one. So apparently monsters don't have names. They just get assigned a number. And this was the number one. And he's like, well, do you remember why you're doing this? And why you're making all these other monsters collect these things and taking from us? And he said, honestly, boys, it's been going on for so long that we don't even know that why we were doing it. It must have happened, back in the late 1800s when beds were being made and we had to assign so many monsters and we had to make so many different beds and so many different things so things just got out of control. And so, well, you have to do better by these guys. They don't want to be caught under here. They definitely don't like London Bridge is falling down. They've been tired of singing that. And they don't like going through our drawers. They don't like going through our washing machines and our laundry. And number one said, are you kidding me? I thought that was the whole reason that they existed and wanted to do that. And the monsters were like, no, we definitely want to stop doing this. And we want to learn other songs. And so number one came out. This is the first time he left his office in a long time. And so he came out with a big megaphone and said, from here on out, no monsters have to stay under the bed or have to be forced to sing London Bridge is Falling Down or forced to steal anything from their people anymore. They can just be friends with the children that they're assigned to. The boys looked at each other, gave a high five. The monsters were hugging, and it was a glorious celebration. And it was the best thing that had ever happened in the history of the League of Monsters. The end.